Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. Today's guest is a family lawyer and interesting practice setup that they have, and I'm sure she will tell you about all of that there at Horra Family Law. So, thank you so much, Reena, for joining us here today. And perhaps maybe you can start by telling us a little bit about your journey there into practice of law and a little bit about family law and your practice.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And I always appreciate coming here and sharing our story and sharing just a lot about what's going on in the family law world. So thank you for that. I actually run a practice with my sister. Unfortunately, she's not here today, but we are two sisters. We own and operate a family law firm out of Markham. And it's been, I would say, very unique for us because we are family and we are practicing the area of family law. So that becomes a little bit of a different type of practice. The goal is obviously to help families, and that is what we are doing. So it's been interesting the last maybe 2 years, we'd say, or year and a half with the pandemic and so on. But I'll get a little bit more into that later on. But yeah, that's a little bit about us.
Now, were you always interested in family law? I mean, what was your decision to go into law school and get into
Yeah,
practicing law? Where did that come from?
I will say that my mom did a little bit of corporate law and worked in that field. So it stemmed a little bit from there. And then obviously my sister, she is older, so she went to law school first. And the thought was always go to law school. So I enjoyed law. I took a few courses in university, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I think that was the tough part. So I finished law school and I said to myself, what do I do? So I did try, I got into a little bit of real estate and you get into a little bit of personal injury and you do a little, try out everything. But at the end of the day, it's what suits you and what's best for you. And I realized working with people, working with families, and all of that is what I wanted to do. So you have to do what you love, and we do. I would even say for Ritu as well. We both really love what we do and the interaction with our clients. So that's a little bit, a little bit of a story. But yeah, she started earlier than I did, and yeah, and then we decided one day we woke up and we said, you know what, let's do this, and yeah, opened up our own practice. And interesting enough, our dad is an accountant, but he retired about 5 years ago, and he decided to join us. So it really has become a family business. We go to him for the beef patties on Fridays, and he brings the donuts in on Mondays, and he does a lot of the managing around our office and so on. So it's been really nice, a real good family business.
Well, the perfect area of law to be working with your family, I suppose. Although I guess, I mean, my brother actually is a lawyer, and I couldn't imagine us being working
Right.
side by side doing any area of law. But how did Ritu already sort of look to have her own practice, and then you kind of came in, or did it sort of come up together? We want to work together, and let's
Yeah,
go.
we were at a firm together. I was articling there, and she was practicing as a lawyer. And, one day you just kind of say to yourself, maybe this is something we can do because we've always actually worked together. Interesting enough. Well, every time, for me, the right out of law school, I've always worked around her. So for me, it was actually something I don't know any better than working with her. She did get called I think it was about 2005. So she has years without working without me. But yeah, we realized that we actually really enjoy working together. And there's nothing like family. At the end of the day, there's nothing like the two of us, and we're here together, and there's nothing like that. So yeah, we do. Our dad's office is in between us, so we're not right beside each other. And but it's nice. It's nice to work with each other.
Now let's take a look at kind of what family law in terms of the practice is in terms of everything now, and maybe for a number of my paralegal students who are watching, it's an area that they hopefully aiming to get into. Now we don't know what the law society is going to say and all that, but they may not have a very deep background as they do for some of the other people that come in because we study
Mm,
them. So you can tell us a little bit about some of the matters that can come on your desk and a little bit about your practice.
absolutely. So interesting, family law is actually very big, and a lot of people don't know that. There's so many different areas and topics that can come up in family law. So let's go with even topic number one is child and children related issues. So whether that's your common law or you're married and you're getting separated, if you have children, a lot of times, there might be issues when you're getting separated on where are the kids going to live? Who's going to make decisions for the kids? Where are they traveling? What school are they going to? What jurisdiction are they going to live in? So And that could be topic number one when it comes to any of the child-related issues. Topic number two can be child support, where the children are living, who's paying support. Topic number three could be spousal support. If one person is earning a higher income and so on, again, different factors play into all of these, different topics, but another one could be property. Whether you own a home in Toronto, you own a home overseas, that could be another issue. Pensions can be another issue. And division of assets and so on. Step parents is another big one. Grandparent access could be another topic. And, there are those topics where it involves the Children's Aid Society. And those are the difficult ones. Obviously, any children that are part of the society and so on, those are tough matters, but those are other types of matters. And of course, adoptions and so on. So the world of family law is actually, it's very big. So a lot of people think it's just, divorced, but realistically, to get to that divorce, there's so many issues that need to be resolved.
And I guess one question that certainly comes up there that with when you're dealing with a lot of these difficult stories is kind of, do you compartmentalize? Okay, I'm here. Here's the law. Here's what I need to do for my client. And I mean, a lot of that emotions that undoubtedly come. And how do you, if you do, separate kind of the emotion with working on some of these matters with the legal requirements and the rights that you have to protect for your clients?
Absolutely. At the end of the day, we are human. That is what it is. But our goal is to be the pillar of strength for the clients. So we do need to be, strong and realize that maybe the clients are not having their best day today, or maybe they are emotional today, but our job is to be that pillar of strength and to realize that we're there to help the families or the clients themselves or whatever's going on. And I think at the end of the day, once you separate what your job is and what you're trying to achieve, you try to really separate your emotions and trying, again, being the pillar is what's hopefully going to get the client through it.
And what strategies do you have when you're then dealing with those clients and they are very upset, obviously, about the situation, and they feel, hey, it's the principal. I don't want to give them, I don't even like the car that we have, but I want it just because I want it, and
Right.
How do you kind of manage sort of client expectations and all that emotion when you're saying, you have to be the pillar of strength? How do you convince them to let some of those emotions go and look at things more objectively?
Absolutely. You have to look at the bigger picture. That's really what it comes down to. Sometimes and generally in life, I would say, we tend to not look at the bigger picture. Maybe we're looking at the smaller aspects. And the job for, I think, family lawyers is to guide the client into looking into the big and look at the bigger picture. What is the bigger picture? What are we trying to achieve? Right? If we don't have that goal in mind, it becomes obviously very difficult. And then we start looking at the minor details. So if we can, one, focus on what's the goal. And number two, one question I always ask my clients, if you could list, what are the three top things that really, is important to you? And let's say something comes up and it's not in their top three, maybe it's on that number 10, whatever it may be. That's another way I try to bring the clients back in and say, what can we do? This was not part of your top three. Now, again, we understand it's important, but again, let's look at the bigger picture. And I think that's the key in family law, because again, this is an emotional, difficult chapter for many people, probably one of the most difficult. So again, being that strength and looking at the bigger picture, I think that's very important.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know if it was maybe it was on your social media there's a quote about, remember your ex is not your child's ex.
Child's ex. Absolutely.
And so how, in terms of now, I mean, a lot of people forget it, especially when there's children involved, that they have to still they're always going to be connected, right? It's not like you can cut the cord here and you go to the left and you go to the right. But what do you say to clients, especially when you have those situations and you're trying to get resolution to ensure that they know that this is not goodbye, because they're still going to have to facilitate some kind of custody and payments and things like that forever, really?
It's difficult because a lot of clients, obviously, it's hard for them to see that because there's still a lot of emotions involved. So sometimes for clients, it's let's walk away from this, even if it means 2, 3, 4 hours. Let's regroup the next day and to look at the bigger picture. And I always go back to that bigger picture on what are we trying to achieve? What can we do here? And is this something, what would you achieve in court? You have to always look at it from that perspective too. What would a judge really say about this? And of course, we don't know, but we can, with experience, we have a good idea and maybe case law and what's going on. But at the end of the day, if we can maybe look at it from a different perspective and see what we can do.
Now, I see a question here kind of related to what we were just talking about. But
Mhm.
what if the other parent there doesn't put in the effort to comply with visits and connecting with their child? So I suppose if they have some kind of joint custody and visitation, but they don't really
Right.
follow up or what happens in those kinds of
That's
situations?
a hard situation because no one can force you to be a parent. That's really what it comes down to. If you don't want to be a parent, then that's a different story. And I think that's something where we approach it in a different way, because if somebody's being offered time and they don't want to take the time, then of course that's different. Here and there, things do come up. I guess that's a different story. But in terms of what do we do? Well, that parent has to want a parent. And then obviously steps can be taken if they really don't want to participate.
Okay, so perhaps maybe you can take a step back and
Hmm.
look at the process. Now we can pick maybe whatever area, and if later on
Hmm.
there's people want to know about a certain area a little bit more. But how does it go? Let's say when they come and they call up you or your sister or anyone else and say,
Hmm.
hey, let's look at maybe in the process of separation and custody arrangements need to be
Hmm.
made. How does it
Hmm.
kind of go from that phone call until there is a final resolution?
There could be many steps. I will say that I do a lot of my files and a lot of my practice is litigation, which is the court aspect to the files, where Ritu primarily does a lot of the collaborative work, a lot of separation agreements. She's been recently, she had mediation training and so on. So our files are actually very different. Let's talk from a court perspective. By the time you start a court application to by the time, let's say your first meeting in front of a judge, right now, the courts are booking into next year in April is the first court date you can get if you were to commence an application today. So at the end of the day, you're looking at, give or take, let's call it a year until you're actually in front of a judge. And thereafter, obviously, it could continue. So start to end, clients need to set their expectations. This may not happen overnight. The goal is we can control our clients and again, setting expectations and looking at the bigger picture and what we're going to do to move this matter forward. But that doesn't mean that the other side will. And I think that becomes the hard part is a lot of clients have a set time frame. Let's get this done in 6 months. May not happen in that way. So start to end, how things can look can be very different. Some files, yes, we can get them done fairly fast if everybody's cooperating. But if people are not cooperating, things do take time to resolve.
Now, I know your focus is more on the litigation side there,
Mhm.
and your sister's is more on the collaborative approach. But I just certainly finished teaching alternative dispute resolution, and you mentioned mediation there.
Mhm.
So, what in terms of in how likely are you seeing more matters going through that collaborative approach, trying to either negotiate it on their own terms with or without the benefit of having legal representation, and then into I know obviously there's some components where there's mandatory mediation, but how is that in terms of preparing clients for mediation? How does that work with you and your firm?
Absolutely. So mediation is something that, again, the parties have to want to go to mediation. There has to be some type of, obviously, there's factors to mediation, again, domestic violence and so on. That is it something that can work? But at the end of the day, if the parties want to go to mediation and they want to have a resolution in that fashion, then obviously that's something that they can do. Collaborative is another process where, again, they have to want to enter into the collaborative process. When looking at this from another perspective, again, if parties do not want to approach it that way and they want to litigate, then obviously that's what's going to happen. But one thing we're noticing more and more during this pandemic is clients are sitting back saying, do I wait a year, possibly, to be in front of a judge? Or do I go to mediation and possibly have a result in the next 2, 3 months? And that's something that we're finding that the pandemic has actually pushed parents in a different direction than maybe a year and a half ago. A year and a half ago, it was, let's go to court. And now, at one point the courts were closed, or hearing limited matters, I shouldn't say closed, but hearing extremely limited matters. And at that point, do you wait on a list to possibly hear a judge again in 6 months or 8 months, or do you go to mediation? And I'm finding more and more clients are pushing towards the mediation aspect and trying it, seeing what they can do.
And certainly that the mediation doesn't foreclose later litigation either, right?
Right, right. It just keeps the door open to see what can they do. There's, types of mediation with your lawyers, mediation at the courthouse. There's so many different ways that you can do this. But again, if you can try to move forward with a resolution, it's something that can possibly, again, it could work.
Now, you mentioned the pandemic, and I think earlier we were talking about there's been a lot of changes. So let's
Mhm.
maybe look at that more generally first. What has the impact of COVID-19 been on your practice of family law, as well as just maybe the practice generally in terms of changes that have happened as a result? I know you mentioned the courts were only
Mhm.
hearing very urgent matters previously,
Mhm.
and how has that all changed?
So that was the first thing that obviously happened where the courts are only hearing urgent matters. This was at the beginning of the pandemic. And that was difficult because obviously at the beginning of the pandemic, there was access issues. Are parents still allowed to see their children? If one parent, let's say per se is a nurse or a doctor working as an essential worker, are they still allowed to see their children? And that obviously became very difficult on the area of practice and practice of family law because the issues were coming up, but again, if the courts are only hearing things on an urgent basis, matters were not being heard. If you fast forward, and I classify this as different phases during the pandemic, but obviously in the start of the pandemic was obviously, access issues. Then we fast forward to September, where the kids are ready to go back to school, and those became the new issues. Should the children go back or remain online? And that obviously kept moving forward. Every time there was something new that came up, vaccines and so on became one of the newer issues. In an overall perspective, those changes have obviously been difficult because there hasn't been case law on COVID-19, pandemic, for example, or things like that. So we're seeing more and more cases come out on the pandemic, which have obviously been helpful. But prior to that, there were no cases. So that's been a change. The Divorce Act was amended. So words like custody are no longer. It is now called decision making. Access is no longer, and it's called parenting time. So this was a new change with the Divorce Act. A good example is just process servers. We don't need them anymore. In the bigger scheme of it, things are being done over email service now. The courts have a filing system online where you can actually just go into the portal and file your documents. So that was different because we're so used to papers and we're so used to physical paper, and all of that became the new norm of let's file online. Zoom court is the newest one. And, getting used to not having that interaction, physically being in the courthouse. I always say that there's something to be said for even the lawyers and the parties to be really in the courthouse and in front of a judge and hearing what the judge has to say. And again, now it's computer based. So these have been some different, I wouldn't say obstacles, but more so new changes that have happened that I think a lot of the lawyers are dealing with and seeing. And just again, changes. And I'm personally experienced a lot of self-rep clients coming to me that started off this process saying, I thought I could do this on my own. They were used to going to the courthouse, filing documents, and now they've realized that the changes with this online portal and so on, they're finding it difficult. So wanting to retain a lawyer. So many different things are and have come up that I think a lot of family law lawyers are experiencing, but getting through.
You mentioned Zoom court there, and what are your feelings there personally of it? Is this effective if it were to go to a trial? And I don't know if you've maybe run anything or if you've done motions or anything like that where it's been on Zoom. Is that a benefit more so than a drawback with respect to being able to ask questions of
Yeah.
witnesses, things like that?
I've had a few colleagues recently do trials over Zoom. Just they actually finished recently, and it's tough because the witnesses are on Zoom. You're sharing documents, and obviously it's something new for a lot of colleagues. I've been arguing motions frequently over Zoom, and I my personal thoughts. I like being in court. Again, I find it to be I think it's beneficial for myself. It's beneficial for the clients. I think there's just that atmosphere of being in front of a judge. And I think that benefit of being in a court is it's like even right now, I'd love to be in a room sitting and talking with you. There's nothing like, being in the same room as somebody as opposed to being on a computer. But I will say the courts are doing a wonderful job in, arranging the conferences, arranging everything, and everything has gone so smoothly. And again, overnight to go from in-person court to online. The courts have just done a phenomenal job in organizing and so on. But I'm excited for the day we're back in court and you see your colleagues, and there's nothing like that. It's something that's what we enjoy doing and going to court.
And what can maybe share from that experience of doing all those emotions? It's more challenging for you. It's, you're missing out that atmosphere, as you're saying,
Mhm.
to now translate it to Zoom. And again, as much as we're making it work as best as we can, what can
Mhm.
help young practitioners who are now unfamiliar with this change, or it's
Mhm.
all happening in the last year and a bit, right? We didn't have so much usage of Zoom
Mhm.
before that. But what's worked for you in terms of replicating that environment as best as possible?
It's one thing I will say, it's nice when you see the judge's face on the Zoom camera, because that gives the comfort that we're still in court. You see the judges, there's the same atmosphere, obviously, again, just not sitting face to face. And I think for the new lawyers, it's a change. But I think if they haven't experienced going to court, then this is something obviously they'll get used to, and they'll soon adapt to when we do hopefully resume back in court. But that's something that it's still nice to see the court staff and all of that. So that's still been nice, because you're still seeing this, a few familiar faces when you do log into Zoom.
Now as well, I mean, in terms of just the pandemic and the impact on family related matters, have you seen, I mean, I know it's only anecdotal with your own practice, but
Mhm.
have you seen more certain types of applications that are more certain types of people coming to you, or is it kind of drying up, or
Absolutely.
what's going on?
So let's talk about some of the issues. One, domestic violence has just, it's increased. The second big one is support payments. If somebody has lost their job, the payor, let's call it, that's obviously an issue. They're paying child support, as per an income that they were earning in the past, not a current income. So from a child support and spousal support perspective, we're seeing a lot of changes, and again, a lot of the parenting issues. Again, from should we, vaccinate, should we not, online school to in-person school, are you seeing your dad this weekend? Are you not seeing your dad this weekend? Or are you seeing your mom? Or, are you seeing grandma and grandpa this weekend? Those have been, I would say, the real big issues in the last, give or take year and a half. And again, we've never dealt with in school or Zoom school. Never dealt with that before. This is something that's very new. Something like daycare too. Some daycares have still remained open. There are a lot of essential workers out there, so daycares have remained open, and those are being issues. Do you send your kids to daycare? If you are an essential worker. So these have been new issues that, again, the courts, per se, to deal with specifically a COVID-19, no, we haven't seen them. So it's been very different.
Now, I mean, you brought up some of that. I don't know if we've reached any decisions. I know I remember reading something about a judge, and I believe you can correct me if I'm misremembering this, about where there was a dispute about whether their kid can go to school, and say, well, if the government is saying schools are open and you don't feel that they should be going to school, well, we defer to the government if the two of you can't reach a decision.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what one judge commented and said, that if the government says the schools are open, then the schools are open. And we're not in a position to dictate what the government says. So that's been very interesting. A few other cases is that parenting is an essential part. So at that time, when we were calling it essential services, one judge, and I may be off the quote, but basically saying parenting is essential. So, people who say, oh, you shouldn't have parenting time, that one judge, and again, I'll try to find you the quote, or the actual phrase of it, but parenting is essential. So there have been a lot of new cases with a lot of new perspectives, and that's helped the family lawyers and the bar in moving some of these files and having some direction.
Right. So I mean, essentially, that's saying, well, you can't just say, well, we're not going to drop you off at your father's or your mother's this weekend, even though they have in the
Mhm, mhm.
agreements, because what if there's a risk now that I'm going to get COVID-19 in that
Right, right.
that transaction, or sort of not transaction, but the change of visitation, right, in the
Right.
in custody. So has that come up as well? Like if someone said, well, I don't want them going there because I don't know if they're practicing
Absolutely.
proper protocol.
Absolutely. Or, for example, that I know that the neighbors stop by and, they're talking on the driveway while watering their grass, and that's not social distancing. Those are things that have come up. Or one parent is having people over and not, the bubble is too large. Or having people over that are not members of the household. It's so many different issues when it comes to COVID-19 and issues pertaining to access and all of that. And again, schooling, and to go further, parents and their jobs and what's considered to be a risk. A lot of clients that I've dealt with, their parents live with them or grandparents, and they're considered high risk. So sometimes it's not really the child that we're worried about, it's the household and members of the household, and looking deeper into that. So again, it's just been so many new issues and so many different issues that we've been dealing with.
Okay, I see a couple of questions here. Let's take the last one first, because it's kind of what we were just talking about, which is what are the legal rules regarding disobeying stay-at-home orders by the opposite parent?
So stay-at-home orders, well, is it the ones that the courts have told the parties, or the government? And I think that's
I guess maybe the government up until like last week, right? You weren't allowed to go out unless you were getting like exercise or something like that. So what happens, I guess, if you don't pay attention to that?
It's hard because in a family court perspective, obviously we present this information to the judge, and judges have to make a decision on if what the other side was doing was enough to consider it to be, they're not following it. And I guess that's what it really comes down to, is presenting that and looking at the factors. I would assume at this point, if you're going to work and you're an essential service worker, that's maybe a different story. So I think every case, and this is what's been happening, is so unique. Everything is so fact-based that it's hard to determine, what exactly would be right and what would be wrong. So it's really based on facts.
And then I see another question here, and I'm not very familiar, but maybe you are, about therapy reunification, and maybe you can touch on that.
I will say that when it comes to therapy, I actually have a few clients that are in therapy with their children. And from a reunification standpoint, some children are older and we're trying to rebuild. One of the positives I found is a lot of the therapists and even just parenting professionals, they're still working. They've still been doing their Zoom therapy and so on. And that's been actually very helpful. So we're still able to move our files forward if that's something that one of our files does, or does need, whether it's, reunification therapy or so on.
So let's look at this one here. I mean, we can look at it generally. I mean, given that you're looking at dates in April, how do you get to the court with such a backlog of proceedings? I mean, what do you do in the interim if you're not going to have an opportunity till next year?
Yeah, I guess it really depends on the issues, right? So if you're dealing with obviously an issue that can maybe have some negotiations outside of court, that's obviously very helpful. Four-way meetings, so having both lawyers and both parties on Zoom and trying to discuss what can we do to move this forward, involving parenting professionals. So whether that is a therapist or, there's so many different parenting professionals out there, to jump on board and let's try to help this family move into a different direction. Sometimes by moving and removing the lawyers and having the parties deal with the parenting professional, that can help. Mediation, and more or less just discussions. And I think by some of these factors, hopefully we can move the matter forward, even a business evaluator or things like that we can try to do to move this forward. And obviously then that can help. Does it happen all the time? Probably not. Do we hope? Yes, we do hope that we can, assist in some of these tools, depending on the nature of the issues, to move it forward and not wait just till April to have the first issue addressed. And I think the courts expect that too, at some point, to say, everybody needs to see what they can do. Even basic disclosure should be done.
Now, one of the things that I believe from family law, and again, you can certainly correct if that's not true, is that when you have that kind of initial sort of temporary arrangement, unless something drastic has happened between that period of time and whenever courts come with the final orders, they tend to uphold the status quo, so to speak. So is that something that you have to mention to your clients? Hey, before you go and say, it's okay, go and live with your dad, and I'll just see you on weekends, that unless like there's something different now or in the future than what is happening now, that may very well be the outcome.
Absolutely. Status quo is a big thing. And what the arrangements are today could be the arrangements down the line. The courts do look at that. They look at status quo, where are the children, just as an example, been residing, and things like that. I'm not going to say, again, it really depends on the courts and so on. But yes, maybe a judge would say that something that's been going on for years or months maybe is considered what should happen down the line. Hard to say. There's never a guarantee on anything like that. But at the end of the day, I personally always remind my clients of status quo and remind them that yes, your behavior and what you consent to and what you allow from whether it's where your child's going to reside will probably matter down the line. Like I've a couple parents who, prior to having a lawyer, agreed to, let's say, one weekend a month. And that's something they just on their own agreed to. And then they retained a lawyer. They found out certain things. And then they started saying, no, 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 I want more time. And I'm not saying they don't deserve more time, but that's something that, they didn't know and they agreed to. So status quo does matter. And it's something that, people should be getting independent legal advice or any, just legal advice in general to know where they stand.
Now, one thing I think, given, I mean, it's a lot different. Obviously, we're kind of more towards the end of the light at the end of the tunnel. But I think starting off in COVID, what happens when a couple wants to, let's say, split up, go their separate ways, but they can't physically split up because they can't find, I mean, you can't go and see places, showings, things like that. So is there a way that you can be living together, but
Absolutely.
not living together? If you get what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Basements. We've had clients doing that at this point. Nesting, yes, absolutely. Somebody's in the house, somebody leaves. But the basement has been a wonderful option if they really cannot leave. The parents can just make an arrangement saying, I'm going to cook at this time and you're going to cook at this time, but I'm going to live in the basement and so on. So those have been options. But again, there has to be a willingness for the parents to be okay to live in the same home and live under the same roof, separate and apart, but obviously that they're okay doing this. And I think that's something that they have to want to do.
Now, were any, I know for some areas of law, there were a lot of the limitation periods were suspended. Now, I know, I believe for if you wanted to go through a divorce, it doesn't just happen like, okay, tomorrow we can go, and even if it's on consent and we can be divorced, there's usually I think a 1 year period. Is there any exceptions to that 1 year period, or you're
So
always?
there are, at the end of the day, I will say this. The 1 year you need to be separated until you are divorced. Sometimes that 1 year is beneficial because if you do have obviously issues you need to resolve, it gives the parties that time to resolve the issues. Number two, if your child related issues have actually not been dealt with, the courts will likely maybe not give you the divorce. So at the end of the day, I think that 1 year really gives parents that opportunity to really resolve their issues. And it's interesting how fast the 1 year does go by.
I see another question here about
Yeah,
children and how, I mean, is there an age, I think, where they say the child should have, and I know that's usually something like the best interest of the child, but at what
absolutely.
point does the child, or through the
Have a
office
voice,
of the children's lawyer, I believe,
right?
get to kind of give input of where they should be?
Absolutely. So we've done, the Office of the Children's Lawyer, it obviously depends on the situation, right? What their involvement would be. Are they coming in to do a custody and access assessment, or are they coming in to just do a voice of the child? I've had clients' children at the age of 12, 13 start doing a voice of the child and present that report. And that report goes to the judge, and the judge looks at the report and, more or less decides what's going on. Recently we had one for a 13-year-old. Obviously the older the children are, their voices are going to be heard. Now, is it going to be, 100%? No, there's nothing in this world that's ever 100%, but the courts do take that into consideration. And that's why they've allowed these voice of the child reports.
And then if, I guess it's kind of related here about, if a child that's older then doesn't want to have that relationship, is that factored in there in those reports as well?
It does. And it all depends. And this is the interesting part. Everything's case by case. And everything really depends on how old the child is. Obviously, what the child comes out and says and what their views and preferences are. And that's really what it comes down to. But I think the courts have to look at this case, or every case, as its own case because no family is going to be the same. No child is the same. No situation is the same. So we really have to look at the factors. We have to consider, okay, what's the age of the child? What's the arrangements? What's going on here? What are the previous arrangements? Have both parents always been involved in the child's life, or is it just something new? One parent wants to, get involved. So I think every situation is very different.
Now you mentioned situations being different, but what happens when situations change, right? I mean, you
Mhm.
mentioned if someone loses a job or there's a loss of income in some capacity, but
Absolutely.
what happens where now they have a more of a time that they can take on more
Right.
visitation or and things
Right.
like that? How do things get amended, let's say, from
Yeah.
arrangements, and what happens if there's no give and take really from the status quo? The other
Right.
side doesn't want to move now.
Absolutely. So let's say, for example, you have a separation agreement or you have a court order. Let's go with a court order, even a separation agreement. Obviously, if the parties agree to change it, they can. But if they don't agree, and let's go with a court order mostly, or even a separation agreement, you can go to court and ask the courts to change it. And that's actually a proceeding called a motion to change. And what you're basically telling the courts is, I have this agreement or I have this court order, now I'd like it to be changed, and asking the courts for the change, depending on what the change is. So, if, just as an example, courts, my income was, $30,000, and now this year it's $10,000. I'm seeking a change in child support. That's something that you can go to the courts for. There needs to be a material change in circumstances showing the courts, well, why are you here? What's the change in circumstances from what you signed off on or what the court ordered or whatever it is, and why you're here. Interesting enough, those type of proceedings, the first conference, which is typically in front of a judge, is actually now in front of a DRO, which is a dispute resolution officer. And they are senior lawyers who actually review and actually do the first quote unquote meeting. And Ritu has been appointed as a DRO for Newmarket Courthouse. So interesting enough, she handles, obviously on a panel with other lawyers, those type of cases. So it's very interesting, things that parties are changing, whether it's support, access arrangements, but again, there is an opportunity to have those issues changed if there is a change, but there needs to be a material change in circumstances.
And I guess maybe the follow up then is what I mean. I know the answer is usually going to be it depends, but in terms of what is a material change of circumstances, um, it certainly could be. Again, there's a lot of variance in terms of work, right? I mean, you can get raises and cut back and things like that. I
Mhm.
mean, what kind of rise, or give me maybe some examples, as we can be more general, of things that would make that
Right.
threshold of material change.
Right. Let's go with really a loss of job, a loss of employment. You've lost your job, you've tried and you've tried and you've tried and you cannot find a job. Now, that's not to say that the courts are really going to say, okay, no problem. There has to, I've seen cases like that. And of course, my first question is, show me an example of where you tried to apply, as opposed to saying you've lost your job and that's it. We can't do anything. Access arrangements. I've had clients, and even cases where the other side has actually stopped wanting to move forward with parenting time. We have a court order, and the other side has said, no, I don't want this parenting time. So we can't really sit with a court order that allows parenting time when the other side doesn't want it. So we have brought a motion to change. Things like that. I've seen other parties bring motions to change, whether it's material change of circumstances or not, on a pickup and drop off, things like that. Absolutely. Despite the loss of a job, the child still needs financial support. Absolutely. But this is where, situations like this, we try to assess and see. Like, the pandemic was obviously very difficult, because if somebody was working in an industry that that whole industry was shut down, that's going to be a very difficult situation, because where do they get the income from? I think pandemic situations are a little bit different than non-pandemic. In a regular course of life, if somebody lost their job, there might be an opportunity to find another job. But I think the pandemic was very difficult for some people.
Now, in terms of certainly the practice, and one of the things we've been talking about quite a lot, a couple of things here, but let's look at the mental health aspect first. I mean, there's a lot at stake. We were talking about the emotions there and dealing with the
Mhm.
emotions. Now, what have you found in terms of whether with your clients or yourself personally, in terms of handling all of this and making sure you have time for yourself given the demands of our profession?
Absolutely. It's walking away and finding that break. I've noticed a lot of lawyers are working at 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night because they're working from home. It's easy. You just go downstairs or wherever their workstation is. There's no travel time. And it's easy to just start working at 7 o'clock in the evening when you're done work, or sorry, done dinner and whatnot. So I think for us and Ritu and myself is finding that break and telling ourselves that at a certain time, no, we're going to walk away. Because for a long time, you start realizing you're still working at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night. And even for the clients, they're noticing too that between, court and what's going on, they also need a break. And finding that period of time where you can just walk away and take time for yourself. And I think that's important. I think it's really important because if you don't, it can be a lot.
And related to that, that is especially as you said, a lot of what's happening now is that we're replacing that commute time. Now I know you're out in Markham, so maybe your commute was a little bit different than the midtown or downtown lawyers, and but still, I mean, a commute nonetheless. And like you said, well, okay, well now I'm not commuting. I have an extra half hour on both ways. I can work for another hour.
Mhm.
What can my students here? I mean, especially when you start into the profession, when you were articling, maybe you can recall you want that, though, you want to please the principal lawyer or the people there, so that maybe you either get hired back or they'll write a nice glowing reference letter. And
Mhm.
how do you kind of find that balance of doing all of that, but at the same time not putting yourself and burning yourself out when you leave the profession completely unhappy with the amount of work or the expectations
Mhm.
of you?
I think it's really at the end of the day finding time. One thing Ritu and I, and if you ever go on our social media, you always see. First, even though we're not at the gym right now, we do when the gyms are open. We love going to the gym, and it was something that we always made time for. Whether it was 6 in the morning or whether it is 7 in the evening or 8 in the evening, is finding that little bit of time to say this is what I enjoy and I'm worth it. I'm worth half an hour on the treadmill, and doing things that you enjoy, whether it's the gym or whatever it is, but finding time throughout the day. Because if not, it can be a lot, and you don't want to burn out. And it's something that you want to love what you do, and you want to love yourself too. I think that's really important, and taking care of yourself. And if you don't take care of yourself, no one else will. So that's one thing I think we personally say to each other. I think one big thing we've been doing a lot is just going for walks. Ritu will call me on a Saturday afternoon saying, "You want to go for a walk? It's really nice outside. Let's go and walk." And that's something where sometimes I don't want to get up and go for a walk, but we do it. And it's finding that little bit of time, whether again it's Saturday afternoon or whatnot, and just to do something for us.
And do you think that it helps? I mean, obviously, I think working with your family, right? I mean, there's two. It's like a double-edged sword, right? One could be, well, you don't want to be disappointing your sister, but at the same time, maybe your family is more understanding. Well, hey, I need some time. I need to go.
Absolutely.
How are you finding that kind of working with Ritu?
Absolutely. I think we both understand what we're going through. And it's been a busy year. And I think we both understand from the work perspective and from a personal perspective. One thing we have been able to do is really separate. And when we're at work, we're at work. And when we're going for a walk on a Saturday afternoon, we really try to talk about neighbors' gardens and what we can do with our own gardens and other trees and so on. We do try, and to just separate the work talk from the home talk. And again, to say it's always happening, no. We do talk about our cases and business and everything like that on our walks, but we do really try to take that time and separate. And I will say that's the benefit of working with family, is we all see what we're going through, whether it's somebody's in court or something's going on. And that's very helpful for us because there's nothing like your family seeing it and everybody pitching in.
Now, another thing that we've talked about quite a bit over the year plus here of all the different people I've had in is certainly the diversity in the profession, and specifically in family law, you're going to see all different makeups of family compositions, right? I mean, we've had interracial marriages. You can have differences in ages. You can have same-sex marriages, and does it help? Obviously, being having especially working with your sister there, the diversity that you have and your firm has to be able to deal with the different situations so that they can better connect with you, knowing that you can understand what's going on rather
Mhm.
than somebody
Absolutely.
else.
I think the more you can connect with people, I think the easier it is. And different walks of life and different people and different circumstances. And I think it does help. I think it does help that we can all maybe approach it from a different way. And again, just different experiences. And it's very helpful.
And what are you finding is the greatest challenge? I know it's been a busier year for you, but what are the greatest challenges that you're finding within practice of family law?
I think right now, the challenge that I think a lot of lawyers, we were actually talking about this the other day, is there's a lot of new changes within the courts, and sometimes it can be monthly. And every court has their own set of rules right now. And that becomes difficult, or I wouldn't really say every court, every region. And that can become difficult is keeping up with every region and what their changes are. Because again, pre-pandemic, we knew the rules, we've always known the rules, and that was it. And now every month there could be something new. And I think that becomes, you know, you're constantly learning the new rules of the courthouse and so on, and the different rules each court has. So I think for all family lawyers, that's just been I wouldn't say challenging, but it's been something new because again, something we're just not used to.
Now, one of the things, again, we mentioned it earlier, that the law study's been looking, they've done a bunch of different studies, and potentially they can open up some aspects of family law to
Mhm.
paralegals. Now, we don't know what the end result is going to be, but for an area that is going to be potentially brand new and potentially open, what are some pieces of advice you can share with any of the students listening as well? I mean, any young lawyer who's maybe looking at getting into family law
Mhm.
about working within that field
Mhm.
in our profession.
Mhm. I think the first thing is you really have to separate your emotions. Working in family law, you may see things that you've never seen. You may hear things that you've never heard, and that can be difficult. So one thing is really separating and knowing the role that you are the lawyer, you are in this professional capacity, in whatever capacity that means, but you are acting in this role, and you are the pillar for the clients. You are their strength. You are their you're going to be picking them up, and that's the job. That's the role. So that would be the first thing is, really understanding that. And number two, just being open. There's different cases out there and explore all of them. I've seen some lawyers that only focus on specific cases, maybe only child related or only property. Be open to it. Learning is the best path. And there's a lot to learn in family law and a lot to grow. And I think that's something that just be very open to it and ask for help. There's lots of good support, whether it's law clerks and lawyers and so on, and lots of good CPDs out there. And, the learning never stops. And that's something that I really believe in. When I first got called, one thing that I did was I went to the courthouse and I watched motions. And I watched trials and I just sat there watching and learning. And that's a good thing. Learning you need to do. So something to consider.
Well, I think you just touched on that there, but maybe if you have any other gems here with respect to getting to know some of the required knowledge. And as you said, it changes all the time. So, on top of going and observing as much as possible, is there anything else paralegals or lawyers or
Mhm.
students can do to get more knowledgeable about working within family law?
Mhm. Well, one, of course, going to the courthouse is really good. Number two, when the courts were open, I was presenting the mandatory information program for Newmarket Courthouse, which is a program that anybody who commences an application, they have to go through this program. And going and sitting in on some of these sessions. So anything that you can physically attend, I think it's very important. There's case law that's always coming out, so something that you can participate in. For lawyers, there's a Facebook group for lawyers that recently was, I wouldn't say recently, but since the pandemic. And lawyers, it's a group just for Ontario lawyers, and they post questions and they post different scenarios and what's going on. And I think that's wonderful to connect with your other colleagues on things that are going on. We share case law and different information. And I think it's really important to engage in that and as much learning as you can do.
Yeah, and certainly for you students, I mean, you can always, and nothing stops you from networking and connecting with any family lawyers and saying, hey, can I pick your brain? I'm really interested in this area.
Absolutely.
And again, it's a lot easier. I was talking with Reena at the outset before all of you came in, that it's a lot easier to connect. I mean, I know there's a little bit of Zoom fatigue now, but it doesn't take as much time as having to set up like a meeting over coffee in
Mhm.
person as you can doing a little Zoom call for 15 minutes even to pick their brains. So I mean, that's something I would recommend as well.
And yeah, lean on your friends and your colleagues or somebody you went to school with. And a lot of information out there, but leaning on people and asking questions, there's nothing like it. So, really find that group of whether it's law clerks or lawyers and so on. And it's good to share information. Actually, a friend of mine, she's a law clerk out in Brooklyn, and we share case law and we share, there's new court notice finder that we found, and we're all sharing this information. So whether it's between law clerks and lawyers or anybody, it's great to share information.
I see maybe a couple last questions that we may have missed. I'm
Sure.
scrolling up in the chat here. And I'll kind of make this more general to the question here. But if there is a pre-existing court order, can the parties mutually change it without having to involve the court, or is it something that has to go back to the court?
Listen, it's always good to have it changed by the court, right? There's nothing like, having it in writing properly as opposed to any verbal conversations. I can tell you a lot of clients don't do that and they just do it verbal. They don't do verbal, they do it more so over email. It's always good to change it, but a lot of parties are fine with the fact that they've consented over email, and that's something that they have to be comfortable with.
And I think there's one more here about, again, we were talking, I guess, before about the pandemic and if the organizations or even like the court, like CAS, could they ensure or order out somebody given that there's a pandemic, or do some of those things get suspended given the circumstances we're in?
Suspended in terms of the court orders?
Yeah, like I mean, in terms of being able to go to the courts and have someone removed from the home,
Yeah, I
given that
know
we're all kind of unable to leave type
last
of things.
year, child protection was probably one of the, I wouldn't, I don't want to be certain with this, but from my memory, they were one of the only ones that were still allowed to go and raise issues in the courts. So that's something the courts have, and I could be wrong because I know there's a few different urgent matters, but I believe child protection has always been really one of the main ones. So never been an issue from my recollection that they've been stopped at all. I think anything to do with children have been allowed per se.
Okay, perfect. I'm just double checking here, but I don't think I see any other things that we may have missed. As always, I think the last time I feel like the last time I didn't get to ask any questions. I believe there was just, you were peppered with like dozens and dozens of
Yeah,
questions from all the students. So I'm glad I got to ask a few things this time, but still very appreciative of you taking the time, Reena, and,
thank
and
you
talking
so
with us and
much.
answering all of our questions. Any final words of wisdom here for the students and anyone else listening about
Absolutely.
getting into family law? And again, congratulations as well to you and your sister for all the success
Thank
you've
you.
achieved in the awards at your firm. And if anyone wants to connect with you, how can they do so?
Absolutely. Thank you for always inviting me, and hopefully next time we too can maybe join. But yeah, anybody can connect with us on our website at www.horrafamilylaw.com or on Instagram at horrafamilylaw. Final words are, whatever you decide to do, whatever area of law you choose to go into, whether it is, whatever that is for your own choice, whatever you do, love what you do. At the end of the day, we're all different human beings. We all have different likes. But you have to love what you do. So whether that be personal injury or whatever it is, just really love what you do and always take time for yourself. And I think that's really important, and have that work-life balance. But again, love what you do and find what's good for you. I realized early on that there were some areas of law that just were not for me, and nothing wrong with that. And I was, a little bit discouraged initially, saying, well, I think I should like that, but I didn't, and that's okay. And I'm allowed to not like something. But I did find what I love, and that is family law. So again, just find what you love to do.
Great, great words to end with. Thanks again, Reena, and thanks everyone
Thank
for
you guys.
tuning
I
in.
appreciate everything. Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Reena.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thanks, JP.